UFC 286, Saturday, March 18th. We're going overseas, across the pond, as they like to say. London, England at the O2 Arena. Main card starts 5 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. He, of course, needs no introduction. Jon Anik, the lead play-by-play voice of the UFC. My name's Joe Fortenbaugh. You know, recently for 284, you flew all the way from Florida to Perth, Australia. So I would have to imagine Florida to London is basically like driving to Fort Lauderdale for you.
I'm telling you, man, you couldn't have set it up any better. Miami to Perth, Western Australia. Just don't do it, folks, recreationally or otherwise. Love the tourism board in WA, but just save yourselves, folks. I mean, it's absolutely insane to do that to your body. But yes, we got the direct Miami to London. This will be the first time I call a fight in England since 2013. So 10 years for me between calling fights in the UK. We have a great English play-by-play man over there, John Gooden. But this is obviously our first pay-per-view in this market for the first time in a long time. So needless to say, very excited to have a bunch of throaty UK fans breathing down upon us here in a couple weeks.
Okay, I want to expand upon that a little bit. It's the first time UFC is going to be back in London since 204, which featured Michael Bisping, the rematch against Dan Henderson. It was a win for Bisping there. You know, you've called fights in Rio, which just seems insane with the crowd. You've been to Australia, you know Vegas and MSG. Where's London rank? Fans, atmosphere, like how does that stack up against everything else?
As good as any crowd. And there might be some recency bias when I suggest to you that Perth, despite the fact that I got pelted with French fries, was the best crowd that I had ever experienced. And it really was. It really was the loudest, best all things considered crowd that I had ever experienced. But yes, we put London right up there with the Australias and the Brazils of the world. And shout out to the filthy Americans, by the way, as well. Yeah. You got some good crowds too, even though everybody loves to bang on the Americans. Don't make me take out my passport. But no, I haven't had a lot of opportunities to call fights in front of this market that is exponentially more rabid than it was the last time I was there. So I'm very excited. Obviously, they have a homegrown champion, so to speak, in Leon Edwards, who's defending his title. So this is as good as it gets. And candidly, the last time we were there for a major pay-per-view, it happened deep into the night. You know, this one's going to be prime time in the UK, I believe 5 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. So, ready to go. Is your name Joseph, right? Can I call you Joseph?
Joey, you can go with Joseph.
All
yeah.
Right, because
actually, fun fact, Joseph Harrison Fortenbaugh the fourth. Wow. And when I had my son, who's the fifth, every nurse in the hospital had to stop by because they had never seen a fifth. Now, never mind the fact that I don't want every nurse in the hospital stopping by at any hour to satisfy their own whims and their own bucket list items. They all had to check in on us.
Dude, that is crazy. I don't know if I would call him 5 or what, but there's a lot of different ways you can go. That is very impressive. But no, you got to be careful. Guys who go by Joe, you start calling them Joseph, you find out their name's Joel and you get into trouble. But congratulations, man. 5 spot of Joseph Harrison Fortenbaughs.
Yeah.
Wow.
Each one crazier than the previous one. Each one. So I know
my money's on 5.
My old man's advice was always the same. He always looked at me and he said, I hope you have a son just like you. That's what he told me my whole life. So we know where that's going. I want him to be a fan too. He and his brother, Wyatt, who's 4, they just started jiu-jitsu. They love it. They wrestle on Wednesdays. They've been getting into it a little bit. So I've been introducing them and they probably will have the opportunity to stay up for this because the main event, I mean, of all the fights we're going to see this year, in terms of anticipation, it's Usman, it's Edwards. It's the 3rd installment. The last time we saw them was Salt Lake City, the 5th round kick to the head from Leon Edwards to take the title. One of the great calls of your career. People are still talking about it. You look at this right now, Usman's minus 245. Edwards, as the strap on his home turf in England, is going to be plus 205 here. Leon Edwards was down big early in this fight, all the way through unto the end. Like, how does he avoid that this time out?
Well, usually fighters elevate when they become champion. And I think you're going to see that with Jamal Hill, who just became the UFC light heavyweight champion. Now, Leon Edwards has never been as soft as me, Joe, when I take my shirt off, right? But certainly there was room to gain either when it comes to his strength and conditioning, his overall wrestling and grappling maintenance and commitment, as we have mentioned in the past, right? So I do think there is a lot of room for improvement for Leon Edwards, maybe more than Kamaru Usman, right? Who fought a near perfect fight. Obviously, he didn't get off to a great start. Usman could absolutely get off to a better start. Now, a lot of people want to factor the altitude or the elevation into the handicap, and I think you need to do that, right? I can't wait to London to sit down with Leon Edwards and get him behind a closed door in our fighter meeting, off the record or otherwise, to find out how much that altitude really affected what was a largely listless performance for the middle 15 minutes. So for me, it's hard to begin around the handicap without talking about that very factor. Now, certainly in terms of Kamaru Usman's risk mitigation, I expect him to take fewer chances, but Leon Edwards is a big, big man, and he is absolutely no picnic on the ground. We saw that obviously in round one. So yeah, I can understand why, if bettors aren't salivating at Leon Edwards at plus 200 at home, so to speak, they're certainly interested.
That's such a great point you make, because untrained eye like me, Usman was dominating that fight. It was basically like you guys were kind of talking about, fifth round, he can just stay away. It's not one of those, it's really close, you have to go win the fifth. He could just stay away, be conservative, and he retains. And instead he stays aggressive. Does that aggressive mentality, like you said, do you see him throttling back a little bit here? Because if he does, that could be huge for Edwards.
Well, if he is up as clear as day 3-1, as seemingly he was the last time, you got to think he gets on the bicycle at least a little bit and tries to manage risk. This brings up open scoring a little bit, right? Because if Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards know where they're standing, and this is part of the reason why I'm against open scoring, is the onus then is on Leon Edwards to such an extent, right, that the crowd's booing him, and it's like, man, you knew you were down and you still didn't do anything, right? I don't know that it's necessarily fair to the fighters, right, and effectively changes the sport. But it is hard for Kamaru Usman to change his stripes, you know, to whatever degree has his confidence been impacted by that seminal moment. And I don't know the answer to that question, and that's why this is the greatest unpredictable theater in professional sports. Without question. Now, in the co-main event, blink and you might miss it, because I don't think a lot of people are anticipating this to be very strategic and drawn out, although we said the same thing about Gaethje Chandler, and that went to the cards. So it's Justin Gaethje, it's Rafael Fiziev, if I'm pronouncing that even close to correct. I went through quite a bit this morning to try to get that one done. Gaethje has seen a stoppage in some way, shape, or form, 13 of his last 14. Fiziev, one of his last 4 has gone to the cards. So in terms of watchability, where do you rank a fight like this? You put that question well. And dude, anytime you need a pronunciation, you just text me and I'll either say that name or I'll send you Rafael Fiziev saying his name. So it's close. You were very close. No, I actually think the first time you got it right. So for me, watching American football, as I have since the early 1980s in Foxborough, Massachusetts, right, there are several moments during a game where I will be sort of taken aback by the violence in a negative way, almost like, oh my gosh, man, like how does he stand up and survive, right? And this fight, I think, is going to have a little bit of that for me, where just every thwack is going to be like, man, like how is this human being actually taking this punishment right in front of my eyes? Rafael Fiziev, though, man, is the betting favorite in this fight, and I think deservedly so. You know, obviously he learned some lessons early on in his UFC career, but he has looked unbeatable and just ferocious on the feet of late. Now, Justin Gaethje obviously came into the UFC a little bit earlier. He's 6-4 in the UFC. He's fought elite competition, does have an interim lightweight championship belt. But I understand why momentum is with Rafael Fiziev, not just in terms of the betting public, but just in terms of the fan base. And excited to see what he can do with it, with an opportunity. You know, when I talk about Leon Edwards sort of elevating and rising to the level of the competition, I think Fiziev is going to do that. And I think physically, if you're on Instagram, you can tell. I mean, he has an 8-pack that wasn't necessarily there when, you know, he made his UFC debut. So it's a fascinating fight. And if Justin Gaethje can win this one, obviously he gets himself back on an undisputed title trajectory, which is his goal. So this fight has sort of been lurking for a while. Fiziev held out to make sure it materialized, and March 18th, it shall be done. Main card starts with a very intriguing matchup. Marvin Vittori taking on Roman Deliza. It's a middleweight bout. Vittori's dropped 2 of 3, but he had some high-level competition in there. Deliza's on a 4-fight win streak. He's another of these Georgian fighters that seem to be coming up, taking over the sport. A lot of hype, a lot of danger when you get into the octagon with him. How do you like his chances if he wins? And then if so, I mean, is he headed for a title shot after this? Well, I think he's on the short list, right? If you can beat a guy in Marvin Vittori, who over the last several years has only been beaten by Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker, I think dating back to like 2017. So yes, I think he would be able to lay claim to maybe a UFC main event or potentially a title shot, depending on how things structurally fall. But Roman Deliza, man, another guy who I think learned a valuable lesson with an early loss in his UFC career, obviously was one of the real statement makers in 2022, putting everybody away. And I have said publicly, fighter meeting setting, Roman Deliza, the single most intimidating guy on the roster. Like, I might actually ask my boss if we can like avoid him the next time around. No, I mean, he's a gracious guy. He's a thoughtful martial artist. He doesn't have your prototypical head coach. He has UFC heavyweight Sergey Spivak and another training partner in his corner. And it remains to be seen how long he'll be able to sort of maintain and succeed with that approach. But Marvin Vittori, obviously, as you know, brick-headed, built like the side of a backyard shed, and only elite competition has gotten the better of them. And candidly, fighting Whittaker and Adesanya over almost an hour, they haven't been able to put him away. But Roman Deliza finishes people. And, I hope he doesn't break my hand in our next fighter meeting.
All right, so let's say you put him, let's dive into that. Let's say you put him at the top of the list. You go into these fighter meetings, you're meeting with all of them before the events. For those who don't know, you get some background, some color, stuff that will help with the broadcast. It educates and informs you guys, and that's in all sports, football, everything. Deliza, who else? Who are like the 3 to 5 that Jon Anik says to himself, I better not screw up the question. I don't want to get dropped.
So Deliza is a recent one for me. I think I only sat down with him for the first time a few months ago, and I was like, man, like this dude is looking through me. John Jones is just a special athlete, and he and I have always been on great terms. And you can imagine that at times that might have been a tricky navigation because my broadcast partner, Daniel Cormier, has been his chief most rival and one of my dear friends. So, but dude, there's just something that just screams like high-level professional athlete when John Jones walks into the room. So I get starstruck by John. I get starstruck by Jose Aldo. But I don't know that anybody is on the intimidation level of a Roman Deliza, man, honestly. And, maybe my stance will soften when I sit down with him next week in London. But my goodness, man, he scares the hell out of me.
So on the other spectrum, who's the guy that you would sit down and talk to and be like, man, this guy is such a sweetheart. You would never think he's capable of doing what he does in the octagon.
Hundreds upon hundreds of examples, right? I mean, Billy Quarantello is a real violent prick at 145 pounds and is probably Mr. Congeniality for me. But literally, you have hundreds of examples of the respectful martial artist that will give you the hug and make you feel like a true brother. Very few examples of guys who look like they would like to, fight you if their opponent's not there this weekend.
So same question we always wrap these up with. We hit on all the major fights for everybody, but between the early prelims, everything else that's on the card, what's the one that stands out to you that we should be paying attention to?
Got to be Jack Shore and Makwan Amirkhani at 145 pounds. Jack Shore coming off of his first career loss, and a lot of people think that he's going to come back well. Also, Muhammad Mokaev at flyweight. A lot of people feel like his ceiling is championship. He's going to be featured on the early part of the prelims.
Incredible insights as always. Jon Anik, the lead play-by-play voice for the UFC. You can catch him UFC 286, O2 Arena, London, England. This is Saturday, March 18th. Main card starts at 5 p.m. Eastern on ESPN+. Plenty more rolling out on OddsShark as MMA is going to have a huge year. So keep it checked with us. Best of luck on all your bets moving forward.